Hi, and welcome to another conversation with RevelCoach. Each week, my sister Alison and I get a chance to celebrate another woman in business. And I always get so excited when I see who's coming up to a conversation because Anna is somebody I've been working with and a very good friend of RevelCoach and what we're also passionate about with mentorship. So before I start the conversation, I want to introduce Anna behind the scenes. So she is Chief Digital Technology Officer at Tential, who has dedicated her career to helping advance the role of women in technology. And her background, she's in 2021, she received a recognition for her work in making tech more equitable, being named Staffing Industry Analysts top 50 DE&I Influencers in the US and Canada. And she's also been recognized as SIA Global 150 Powerful Women for the last 4 years. So a ton of recognition. And Anna, I am so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. I'm glad we got a chance to be able to do this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to start off with something I know you're very passionate about. I hear you say this all the time, but you often talk about how we lead and we show up in order to inspire and mentor the next generation. So can you tell me a little bit more about, maybe a story about where that passion comes from, and we can talk more questions about how you do that.
Oh, Marcy, I love the topic about the next generation. I think the inspiration really comes from, my upbringing. I'm first generation in this country. My parents migrated here from Italy a really long time ago, so I won't share when they came here. But I think what happens when you're first generation in this country, I really do think you're kind of wired a little bit differently because you see how your parents really struggle to make it in the country. And if you think about it, if you ever travel to a country that you don't speak the native language and you're trying to communicate, if you want to get a bottled water or you want to know where the restroom is, and thank God English is a universal language. But just imagine before English was a universal language, you trying to fit in and just the simple things that you're trying to communicate and not being able to do that. And now you're doing that while you're on vacation, but now you've made this a permanent life choice, right? That you're establishing roots in a foreign country. So every time I think about that, it actually empowers me to be able to not only pass that passion, but I take a look at my grandkids, I take a look at the kids in the family, I take a look at my nieces, my nephew, and I always want them to hang on to that passion, the passion that my father had to succeed in this country, that my mother had to succeed in this country. And I want them to embrace that. So that's why everything that I always do, I always say for the next generation, because they're the future, right? And you want them to be able to grasp that, but also pave a great future for themselves and for their kids.
Anna, this is very interesting. And I love the fact that you're able to go back and use your own background as your driving principle with the idea of belonging. So just for me personally, when you say belonging, what does that actually mean to you?
So belonging, I spend a lot of time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion with not only within the organization at Tential where I'm at, but also in outside organizations. But inclusion is when a company goes out of the way where they're trying to create an environment that you feel included. But see, belonging is one of those acts where you personally feel that you fit into that team, that assignment, that project, that function, right? It even extends outside of that when you take a look at some of the challenges that maybe teenagers have, right? Belonging within a friend group. So it comes from within. And that becomes a little bit harder because how do you create an environment that's safe where you feel that you fit in to that environment? Recently, when I was at SIA and also at TechServe and ASA, some of the staffing industry organizations, one of the most common themes was around creating a safe work environment because there's a tremendous amount of focus in regards to that. And as I talk to the kids in the family, I always use them as my litmus test as far as what's going on out there. There's a lot of pressure on schools in creating environments that children feel that they belong, that they fit in. So it's not just a blanket statement that everybody gets invited to the same function, therefore everybody's included. No, that's not creating an environment that you belong, right? You have to kind of take it that extra step. So it is somewhat challenging to do, but there are certain steps that you have to take to be able to create that true proper environment.
So like, let's transition it to like women in STEM. I think there has been a great movement with, getting women interested in science and technology in the younger years of elementary school and things like that. A lot more mentorship. The numbers aren't quite there yet, but when you're mentoring women going into, say, a profession that might not have a lot of diversity, in this case of gender, how do you kind of coach them into feeling like they belong, despite there might be traditional behaviors that might feel like they're not included, but they're actually welcome because like everybody wants them there, but they might not feel like they belong? How do you help somebody that's young in her career navigate, in this case, technology, if there isn't a ton of gender diversity?
Well, that's a great question, because I think there's a challenge at a couple of different levels. If we take a look at within the school system, there's actually studies out there that talk to the fact that boys and girls learn differently, right? So when you look at how girls learn versus how boys learn, maths and sciences, depending on the grade levels, you'll see how they embrace technology, right? So therefore, I think schools really need to kind of start looking at creating programs that it's not just one blanket approach to education across the board. And I know that's really difficult and challenging, because what winds up happening is you have a class of 30 students, and guess what? Everybody's going to get it the same way. So that means that whoever winds up embracing it, fantastic. But then the ones that don't, then that's just too bad. I have a niece who has a learning disability, and actually my sister had to fight for her to be able to get special aid during school. And if it wasn't for my sister's diligence in being able to get that special attention, and it was a constant battle year after year, and she finally did get the help that she needed. Now she's in college, she's on the honor roll, consistent every single semester, because she got the help that she needed. So again, it's not a matter of, it's a matter of changing how a student receives the information that can make them excel. So now that's talking about at a school level. Then when you look at within the work environment, again, it's up to organizations creating environments that it's not a systematic approach regardless for everyone. I've seen so many teams where they say, well, we want to have diversity within our team. We just hired 2 women within our team, but they left after 6 months. Okay, well, have you changed any of the behavior within the team? No, you haven't. You haven't culturally changed the environment at all. So again, it becomes a management issue. It becomes that you need to be able to, it's not a matter of checking off the box and saying, just because I hired 2 females or I hired 2 ethnically different individuals, that I'm meeting my quota and therefore I'm handling my diversity needs. It's a matter of changing the approach, right? And changing the cultural acceptance that's necessary. So it becomes a much bigger ask. And sometimes you're flexing muscles that you might not be used to flexing. It becomes a little bit challenging for organizations to want to accept that.
I have so 2 thoughts on this. Is I understand the idea of the top down, meaning management needs to embrace the idea of creating a scenario where people can be mentored, and they connect people to say, this might be your mentor, or this is a relationship to start with. But there's also the other side where we need to take into our own hands the trajectory of our career growth, and that we find mentors. So how do you go about in both aspects? Like, how does management go about making sure that the new young employees have that mentorship that they need, but also that you take it on yourself to make sure you get the guidance you need?
Oh, absolutely, Alison. I think you're 100% spot on. At the end of the day, you are responsible for your career. Absolutely. So, I mean, for example, when I started off in my career, I don't even think the word mentor was invented, right? So, this has been something that's become, very popular within the last maybe 10 years, 15 years that you see the word mentorship as a very popular topic of discussion, and programs are starting to become more formalized that you see organizations actually putting together coaching and mentoring programs within companies. But I was a big believer from the start, and actually, and I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about it, but recently I was a co-author in a book, Together We Rise. And one of my passions in that chapter was mentorship. And I started from a very early age. And I have to say, I go back to my father because he was probably my first mentor in life, where he always taught me to look at, like, starting off in my career, look from the people that you're working around you and learn from them. Right. So if you're working with someone and you see that they're doing something that you admire, go to them, ask them, can I ask you about this? Like, you approach that meeting this way. Please, help me understand, like, why did you approach it this way? So very simple, thing to do just by opening up that dialogue and that conversation. And again, it was my dad that kind of opened up my eyes that you can do that. It's okay to be able to have that kind of conversation. I was also very fortunate that in my career, I had great managers that would provide me with as much guidance as I would ask for. But again, I would initiate a lot of the dialogue and the conversation. So I thought that was always, tremendous that I could have that kind of dialogue. So I'm a big believer of always look at, I always used to say, look to the left, look to the right, look above, look below, because you can learn from everybody around you to be able to shape your career and kind of see, like, what next. Whatever position you're in, always look at, like, what next, like, what else can you learn and what next do you want to do in your career. And it's never too late. Like, you always should be doing this until the day you decide to, retire and not want to do that. But then you should be coaching and mentoring the next generation is what you should be doing.
Pass it on. What I also love about that is, like, when you say look left, right, up, and down, it goes to your theme of the next generation, because in many ways, it's that next generation that's going to teach us the most about where business is headed, because their expectation as a consumer and as an employee and as everything is totally different than ours X amount of years later. But it really, it shifts. So if you kind of have that mentality of just opening the door with asking for feedback and learning from everyone, it does teach them through your example how to, include yourself and how to belong by asking them advice.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, even with that approach, you're going to encounter people that are not willing to help you, and be prepared for the people that say, I've had plenty of people in my career that have said, Anna, stay in your lane. Anna, you're asking for too much. Like, Anna, like, why are you not happy with what you're doing? Like, why do I keep asking for more responsibility or to do more? But what you need to do is you need to kind of stay true to yourself and what you want to do, and don't let that shut the door. You just find a different path, and you just keep chugging along, and kind of keep progressing that way.
Yeah, well, that's really good, because it is life. I mean, everyone has different viewpoints on how to, build a culture or get results done and things like that. So I'd love to ask you a question. Like, so I know you have had a lot of success with diversity and inclusion and kind of navigating that both personally as well as for the other team. So we often have people on this call that are looking for, they like the female glass ceiling has been shattered a long time ago, but there still are some dynamics they're trying to break through. So for any women that are the go-to leader, in their company, they happen to be the gender, they happen to be diverse, and they're championing it for others. What are some, like, I don't know, I want to say positive because I want to be like, what works, but also what are some like potential pitfalls that they can fall in as their, the main go-to person in leadership of that diversity category? Any kind of advice for somebody that's championing that?
Well, sometimes obviously you might not be the most popular person, right? If you're constantly the spokesperson for everyone. And I would encourage um, that you're not just always the voice, right? That you wind up seeking others to be part of the voice, because it can't be just one person that always champions the message. I think a lot of times what I often advise is make sure you have the facts and figures, right? This cannot be ever an emotional ask. I'm not a fan of just, emotionally ranting about something because you think it's not fair. Yeah, I get it. Sometimes, we can let maybe emotions get the better of us, but that's not how you're going to, move the ball forward. What's going to make things happen and what's going to actually have action within an organization is keeping it simple, facts and figures, and being able to illustrate. I've been involved in conversations where I knew for a fact there were, it was myself and two other female colleagues, and we had three male counterparts, which was actually kind of interesting, in similar roles. It was two business units. And I knew for a fact that the three male counterparts were making significantly more money than the three female counterparts. When I found out about this, again, facts and figures, I took the conversation to the CEO to receive some kind of, okay, look, it's facts and figures. This is what they're responsible for. We're doing basically exactly the same thing. And so there needs to be some equity here as far as we need to make this fair. And it was addressed. But again, if I would have showed up with just an emotional rant of that's not fair, why are they getting this and we're getting this, the conversation would have never started. It would have never, come to fruition. So again, I think it's got to be approached in a very calm fashion. So that would be my advice to anyone that's going to have any of these types of conversations.
One of my favorite quotes by Ruth Bader Ginsberg, she had said, like, they asked about how do you navigate on the bench if you have, different points of view and, how you navigate the cases. And this was like, when she first was appointed, like say 20 years ago. But she says, it's pretty simple, because if the people with the right mind that all are on the same board of like doing good for America and, for the laws that they're supposed to uphold, if they all receive the same information and the same facts, it's not hard to get alignment. So what you're doing, like what I'm hearing this and like kind of just reminds me of that quote, is that, you can navigate anything as long as if the emotions are out of it and you let the facts talk for it, be like, okay, what do we want to choose to do? Because there's still choices on what you do after it. You can say, I choose to do nothing. And then, your company, like there's things that can, but the data allows you to articulate it. And then that's the conversation.
Exactly. And you know what? I mean, it could have very well been the answer. Well, you know what? Financially, we can't, address the gap is too much and we can't address this year. Okay, so we have the answer, and then we could have chosen to, okay, we're going to leave. I mean, we all could have decided, but at least it would have established the foundation for the conversation.
Right. Because it's the momentum of that's not fair, which is what I don't like. When I was leading any sort of diversity, initiatives at my corporation, I didn't like leading it if there's any intention of the voice I was needing to represent was like, it's not fair. So as soon as that little voice got louder in a room or a conversation, I would make sure, there was a lot of clarity on like my purpose. Like, I love the place that I'm at. And I know there's a lot of good intentions, and there's a lot of things that, as we're sprinting as much as we can, we accidentally stepped on a flower in the field, So trying to make sure that the voice is open-minded too. I always thought it was helpful. All right, so I'd love to change gears again. You mentioned something about the book, Together We Rise, and I had the honor of reading your chapter, but I'd like to hear more about that and maybe share one part of your story, and then we can ask more questions about the book, because I know Alison's very curious about it too.
Sure. So actually, this is something that I never really set out as a goal to, I'm going to write a book or be part of writing a book. But what happened was really kind of a lovely story in the sense that in March of 2020, a group of us were going to get together to celebrate Joyce Russell, who ran Adecco for years. She wrote a book called Cherry on Top, and we were going to get together to celebrate her book and the launch of her book. And it was at Executive Forum, SIA, that we were going to get together. And it was March of 2020. Of course, some of you might remember March of 2020 when the world shut down. And because of the pandemic, we never had the big dinner that we were going to be able to break bread together and, have a toast together. So what wound up happening was we did a virtual Zoom champagne toast, and we got together that way. And we wound up creating this Lady Leaders Book Club, where we decided it would probably be a good thing for us. It's 15 of us that we got together once a month, and we would read a book, but it was a great support system. The pandemic, as many of us know, it was not a fun time, and we kind of needed a little bit of that extra support. So it was a lot of fun. So sure enough, we had an author who was also a publisher, said, you all are such interesting individuals. You should do a collaborative effort and write a book together. Of course, she didn't have to say it too often. It stuck, and we said, okay, yeah, sure, why not? What does it take? And we decided to write a book. Now, the nice thing, because it was 15 of us, we were able to, is just one chapter each, which made it very, very doable. And we launched it on International Women's Day, so it was a lot of fun to do it then. But when I had to write my chapter, it was so funny because I was thinking like, oh my goodness, what am I going to write about? How do you summarize? Like, it has to be about leadership in your career, and how do I hone in? And so I was talking to my husband about it, and so he said, you always talk about the power of immigration and your roots. I think you really should kind of tap into that because you're so passionate about it. So that kind of gave me a trigger as one topic. And then the other topic came so natural about mentorship. And what was interesting is if you read the 15 stories, how all of us touch on mentorship in some shape or form. Because if you think about, everybody's got a story in life, and that's what's interesting, and everybody is impacted by somebody in their lives. So you might not want to call it mentorship, but there's some coach in their life that impacts them into making the decisions that they make in their lives, either on a personal level or from a career perspective. So those were the two topics that I touched on in my book. And I touched a little bit about power of immigration, because when I think about, my parents' journey, when I gave the book to my mom, my father passed away in 2005, and I still get choked up because he truly was the mentor in my life. And when I gave the book to my mother, I wrote in Italian in the book, and I said, thank you for coming to this country and for giving my sister and I a future, for not changing your mind and going back to Italy. I mean, I might be stomping grapes in some wine country, or, making Sicilian wine, or, I don't know, raising goats. I mean, I don't know, I'd be doing something not what I'm doing today, but thank you for giving us that opportunity. And they had a rough time. They came here, they came with a three-year-old who would have been my older sister, and she passed away 6 months into this country. Got pregnant, second child, passed away in this country. My mother was desperate to go back to Italy, and my father was determined that he was going to make it in this country. So it's that determination and that, I call it that intestinal fortitude to stay here, that kept him here. So I'm grateful for that. And then, as I mentioned, the power of just great mentors that I met in my life that helped shape and mold me into the career that I have today. I started off technical. I was computer science, mathematics student, a real tech nerd. And then it wasn't for some, a great manager that met me and said, I need to get you in front of clients. You have people skills. I think they would completely lop up how you explain our platform. This will help us on the sales side. And then slowly I started getting involved more on the sales side. As my friends say, I joined the dark side by joining the sales side, but that's what I wound up, doing.
Anna, that's such an amazing story. I would love to hear so much more. We're just about out of time. But how could people find out more about you? How could they get this fantastic book that you've written or helped to write? Where would that be available?
Okay, so the book is available. It's Together We Rise, and it's available on Amazon. So that's the best way to get it. And you could find me on LinkedIn, and it's Anna Frazzetto, Frazzetto.
I love the double letters. I think that's great. Well, Anna Frazzetto, thank you so much for sharing your story with our RevelCoach community. I have certainly enjoyed it. I know my sister Marcy has as well. Again, thank you for listening and thank you for being here. I gotta figure out how to close it.